Thanks very much, everyone, for joining us for the Cyber Ireland R&D workshop series. Today's workshop is on the Enterprise Ireland Agile Innovation Fund. We've held previous workshops on Intertrade Ireland's Impact and Boost programme, on the Secure IT project call, on EU funding calls as well for SMEs. And the objective behind this series of workshops is how can we increase the level of collaborative research and development in the cybersecurity industry in Ireland? And to do this, I suppose we need to build out our cybersecurity R&D ecosystem through both in-house R&D and then also moving on to collaborative R&D between industry and academia and industry and other partners as well. And we know from kind of studying the best-in-class regions internationally and the most successful companies that they have higher levels of R&D investment, but crucially, actually, they engage in collaborative research and development more than other companies. So today's workshop on the Agile Innovation Fund, this specifically allows companies to access up to 50% support for product development, process development, projects up to 300,000. And we're delighted to have Padraig Doolan here today, who's technical advisor for RD&I at Enterprise Ireland and manages the Agile Innovation Fund. And Padraig's just going to go through, what the Agile Innovation Fund is, what it can be used for, the eligibility criteria, and the application process, and how you can access the funding supports that are there. We're going to then have a case study from a cybersecurity company. We want this to be, I suppose, practical and show other companies that have leveraged this type of funding previously. So we're delighted to have Patricia McNeela, Chief Financial Officer for Tinscale, to go through how they are using the Agile Innovation Fund. And then we're going to finish up with a Q&A, so a bit of time for you to ask any questions you have of Padraig and Patricia as well. So with that, Padraig, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Owen, and morning, everybody, or afternoon now, everyone. I'm looking forward to this discussion. So if everyone doesn't mind, I'll just share my screen. And Owen, perhaps you could confirm that everyone can see that all right?
Yeah.
Great. So,
not in my presentation mode yet, but oh yeah, there it is.
Oh yeah, probably. Yeah, it just takes a second delay, like myself. So good afternoon, everyone, and my name is Padraig Doolan. I'm the technical advisor to the RD&I Fund at Enterprise Ireland, and I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the Agile Innovation Fund and how it can help your company tap into R&D supports to develop new product, services, and processes. So we picked the Agile Fund as a nice introductory one to our offers because we really do have a wide range of offers. And the Agile Fund is focused at a high level on the development of new or substantially improved products, services, or processes where the total project cost is less than 300k. And I'm going to come back to that 300k in a few moments. So we recently wanted to see just how impactful our R&D supports are. So back in November, we finished this study where we looked at almost 500 companies that had availed of our R&D supports over the preceding 10 years. And we compared them to a group, and they're represented by the green bars there on the plot. And we compared them to a group of 714 companies over the same period that didn't access our R&D supports and didn't do R&D as far as we could tell, certainly. And they're represented by the gray bars there. And when we crunched all the data, the numbers are very striking. Even if we just look at domestic sales, companies that avail of our R&D supports had more than 60% higher domestic sales. But the big advantage was actually in the export sales side of things. And in one way, that isn't that surprising because an export potential is a prerequisite for getting the funding. But at the same time, we were surprised to see that companies availing of our R&D supports had almost 6 times the number of exports as companies that did not. You combine those figures together, companies availing of our R&D supports and doing R&D had more than triple the turnover and had more than double the number of employees in full-time employment. So the reality is that this is a really good opportunity for all of you out there to grow your sales and grow your staff as well. So the fund then, there's two types of proposals that come into the fund, and it's largely on what you're seeking to develop. So if your idea is a new product or service, then it could be suitable as an agile proposal. Now, if you're a small enterprise, the support for an agile project is 45%. So you remember that if I hark back to the 300K project totals, that's 135,000 that we can give back to you upon the completion of your project. If you're medium, it's a little bit lower at 35% and 25% for a large enterprise. The eligible costs then are salaries, so from your staff members to dedicate time to delivering the project, that's allowable. We levy 30% overhead on those salaries, so that's effectively money you can spend on anything you like. We expect that you're likely to incur materials costs for prototyping and validation. You can put those in. You might well spot some skills gaps that you want to fund through consultancy. That's allowable as well. And then we also expect that you're likely to incur travel and subsistence costs as well. And then finally, if you're in a highly regulated industry, that you can put in certification and clinical trials costs. They're all allowable. Now, how would you know if your idea is really R&D? Well, typically it's going to be the deployment of a new product or service, and it'll usually involve the acquisition of new knowledge and skills. And it'll frequently, although not always, involve prototyping, testing, and validation of those new products or services. A key piece for us is that it can't be a routine change to your existing product, services, or processes. It has to be some step up in R&D capability for the company. And then the final piece is that the proposals must demonstrate some measure of technical uncertainty and risk. There has to be some element there that you're not exactly sure how it will work out, but in the process of delivering on the project, you're going to find the answer. And that threshold, while it needs to be there, that threshold is actually quite low. So on the flip side, and I mentioned that there's two types of proposals that come in. So one is product service. The other one would be where you might be seeking to improve a process within your company. So if that's what you're seeking to do, then it could be suitable for our digital process innovation offer. And the expected outcome here would be a new or substantially improved production or business process. And actually, where we see digitalization very, very frequently coming in under these kind of offers. And this used to be known as business innovation. We've actually rebranded it as digital process purely because it's largely digitalization has been driving a lot of these applications. A big advantage of this scheme is that the support is 50% no matter the size of your organization. So that's 150K that we can hand back to you upon the completion of the project, and all the same costs are eligible here again. And don't worry about making notes or anything like that. I'll make the deck available to Owen and Fiona for circulation afterwards. So digital process innovation then builds on the R&D principles as follows. A DPI proposal that's either going to fall into either process innovation or organizational innovation, or very often a combination of both. So process innovation then is where you're seeking to deliver a new or significantly improved production or delivery method. So a nice way to think about that would be, say, where you have a factory with a conveyor belt system. It's got a defined number of steps in a defined sequence. And you know that process inside out because it's your factory. You know how many staff you need to put on that. You know if you put in X input, you're going to get Y output. And you know you're going to get a product at the end with a defined quality level. And you're so familiar with that process, you've come up with a creative way to maybe rearrange some of the steps. And by doing so, maybe you're dropping some of the steps. Maybe you're making the process more efficient. Maybe you're making it faster. Maybe you're increasing the output. Or maybe you're just even improving workplace safety or improving the quality of the product. And you know that in order to show that your new process is just as good as or even better than your old process, you're going to have to do some trial batch runs. You're going to have to dedicate staff to that. You're going to consume materials. And if you're in that highly regulated space, you're going to have certification costs at the other end to show that the output of your new process is just as good as or better than the output from the old process. That's a really, really lovely process innovation type proposal. Organizational innovation, then that's where you're seeking to implement a new organizational method in your business practices, your workplace organization methods, or even in your external relations. So this is where we see digitalization coming in an awful lot. So let's say, for example, now you have a paper-based method in your company, let's say to do with staff resourcing, for example, and it's labor intensive and it's error prone, and when those errors happen, then you're not getting staff into the company in time, and that's having a negative impact on output. And you've identified that a digital solution will fix those problems for you. And you don't even need to develop that digital solution. You could get an off-the-shelf product once it needs significant customization and further development to fit it into your business practices. That's a really, really nice organization innovation proposal. You may, and this, I think this is very relevant for this group here, intellectual property. You know, if you've got an R&D idea, particularly in your space, I think there's a very good chance that you, in the execution of that project, you're going to be developing very, very valuable IP that you want to seek to protect for the company. And to support this, we've developed two IP, what we call the IP strategy offer. And the focus of the IP strategy offer is to incentivize companies like yourselves to develop an IP strategy which is focused on capturing and managing and exploiting your R&D results as assets for the company in order to maximize your growth potential. So if this whole area is quite new to anyone and you think you're going to be developing valuable IP, we'd recommend you get in touch with the IP manager, Joe Doyle. This is something you can pursue in parallel with an R&D project. The two scheme that we have is the IP Start. That's as the name indicates, it's a straightforward small grant. It'll fund an IP consultant to work with you for a maximum of 3 days at €900 a day, and that's an 80% grant towards that spend. And the second offer then is IP Plus. So this is where you want to put a much more substantial spend in place. So the maximum is up to 70K, and the grant award is 50% of that. And you can spend that on a combination of the IP consultant, but also the focus there is to build up an internal IP champion, someone who's going to become well-versed and conversant in IP criteria, and then can take the lead role, the key manager role in capturing, managing, and exploiting R&D results as IP assets going forward. All the same eligibility criteria apply here: Irish SMEs, clients of agencies, EI, Leo, and Udros na Gaeltachta. You do need to be trading internationally in R&D active, and you need to have that clear need for IP support. But they're largely the same criteria that you would face for going in for an agile application as well. And then because we're in this cyber ICT space, I thought it might make sense to highlight Technology Ireland ICT skillnet. Now there's a wide range of skillnets available, and there may be one that is more suited to cybersecurity, but I think this is the one that is probably right. In case anyone is unaware of it, it's a network in Ireland that will can assist you with training staff in any of these areas: AI, cloud computing, data analytics. So if you do have training, it's important to note that none of our R&D supports will actually support training. So this is something that can be a nice complement and can help you with the whole training element of doing any kind of R&D work. Almost finished now. We got 94 applications to the fund last year. They're represented by the blue bar, and the number of approvals was 86, represented by the green bar there. So that's an approval rate of over 90%. And almost all of the others are represented by the yellow bar there, where we were working with those applicants to get them over the line. The reality is, it's actually extremely rare for a proposal to be rejected outright. The reality is, if you have a good idea and you put together a reasonably good proposal, you are going to get this funding. So hopefully at this stage you've identified a product opportunity or a problem to be solved. You now know whether it's an R&D or if it's a DPI type offer. What should you do next? Well, we would always recommend you talk to your development agency. If you're a client to Leo or us or Udros na Gaeltachta, and pitch the idea to them. If you're all in the, or even if you're not a client of those agencies, you can go to the next step. And we have a 2-page outline proposal document. It's available from our website, but I'll also make a copy of it available to Fiona and Owen at the end of the webinar, and I'm happy for it to be circulated to all the attendees here today. That's a 2-page document. It'll take you less than an hour to fill out. You email that to us at the email address there, and we'll give you feedback within 1 to 3 days. If we're all in agreement it's a good idea and I should proceed, then we'll recommend you go ahead with a full application. And this is essentially just a 2-step process. There's an online application wizard that'll talk you through the whole process, and it'll look for an overview of the company. It's essentially all stuff that is in your business plan, really. It'll look for an overview of the project, and then also detailed breakdown of the project costs. And then the second part is a Word document. It's a 6-step project plan, just looking at the problem, the solution, why it's innovative, what are the risks, what's the work plan, what are you going to do, and who's going to do it, the project team. And that's enough information that allows our tech assessors to validate if your project is eligible under state aid regulations, are your costs reasonable, and is there a clear R&D, that risk element piece I mentioned earlier. So that's it for me. After I'm going to hand over to Owen and Fiona, who are going to run a couple of polls, but then we also have a fantastic case study for you, ThinScale, and Trish is going to tell a really good story of her experience in the fund, and I'm really looking forward to that, and I think you'll enjoy that too. So all our contact details are there. The deck will be made available to the group afterwards. And if I can leave you with one message, it's don't hide your light under a bushel anymore. Reach out to us. Let's have a conversation and let's get you started on an R&D journey. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much for that, Padraig. Fiona, if you want to queue up the polls there and people can answer those. Before we get to I suppose the case study, Padraig, maybe we're answering the poll questions. I suppose one of the questions coming back from companies would say, look, how long is this going to take us to complete the application process? Is it quite time intensive? And is there specific timelines? Is there open dates for the calls or deadlines that people have to meet?
Thanks, Owen. Yeah, well, I'll take the latter question first. It's an open call, so you can submit at any time. We'd always recommend that if you're a client of VI or Leo, you involve your CEDO or your DA and you work with them. They'll often appoint a business advisor to work with you on the application, and that makes the whole process a lot easier. In terms of how long it takes, that's really subjective. We've definitely turned around one in 3 days. But I would say it's a reasonably substantial undertaking. Companies should consider at least putting 4 weeks into it, probably not full time, but that it would take at least that. And it can take months, depending on how much time the company has available. So it is, it's a very movable feast, but it's certainly something that's doable. If anyone's done a priming grant or a business expansion grant from their local Leo, it's kind of comparable. It's a small step up from that, but not a huge step up.
Okay, perfect. And one other question, I suppose, have you seen from reviewing the applications anything that companies should avoid doing? Or do you have any examples of maybe R&D projects or I should say projects that actually aren't covered within this funding call?
Usually we picked up the ones that aren't covered. We usually pick them up at the outline proposal stage on. So that's why we figure it's a good kind of, in fact, the last few I've reviewed weren't suitable. So we'll pick it up and we'll say whether we think it's not R&D or not. We rarely get one in that is unsuitable, because usually the company has worked with their DA, they've worked with their CEDO, or they've reached out to us beforehand. And at some point along the way, either someone reaches out to us or they know, some of the Leos are excellent, really, actually a lot of the Leos are really excellent in this space, and they know when something is not R&D. So we never really get, like, I suppose, a clangor coming in like this isn't suitable at all and they've done all this work. It's usually picked up at the OP stage, and the OP is very trivial. I say it'll take you an hour. It could take you 20 minutes to fill it out. It's that straightforward. So we don't tend to see those ones. If there's one piece of advice I give to companies, it'd be more at the drawdown stage, or sorry, at the execution stage. If you're doing an agile project, make sure to keep your timesheets. That's a key piece, because about probably on average 75% of the costs are salaries, like they are for everything. And we do need to see the timesheets at the end of the drawdown stage. And that's the only thing that maybe companies might get wrong. and could run into trouble with. So that'll be another piece of advice, maybe.
Okay, yeah. So it's good to see there's, I suppose, really the projects are developed with yourself in that process, and it's a fast track process as well. So companies aren't waiting around for it. And my last question before we move on is around IP. This is always something that's going to come up for companies. Is there any issues around who owns the IP if this is being funded by Enterprise Ireland?
There is zero issues around IP owned. The company owns it 100%. We've no interest in getting into that. Our whole goal is to get companies doing R&D. And if we were to kind of have some lean on the IP, that would be a huge block. So no, we provide these supports and they're completely untethered, unencumbered to the IP. The company owns everything. And actually, something I would like to mention, because the speed of this is a key factor. So once a company submits an application, then there's going to be an assessment process, but they can actually start they can start the project straight away. So they actually, once it's submitted, they can start. There's a small caveat that if some costs were disallowed or if the project was turned down, it's rare, but it does happen occasionally. Those costs would be ineligible then. But for the vast majority of our applicants, once they hit submit, they don't need to wait for approval. They can start straight away. So that speeds things up as well.
That's great. That's reassuring, I'm sure, for a lot of companies here. Fiona, if you can close the poll results and show the polls and show the results now. Unfortunately, I can't seem to see them on my screen, but maybe other people can. Yeah,
I can see it anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, if others can let me know if they can see them, that'd be great.
I can see it, Fiona.
And Padraig, even you might just talk through what are the kind of results coming back there.
They just question. Oh yeah, it just went. Question 1 just went, but I can see question 2 here. So question 2 is, what is stopping you and other Cyber Ireland members applying for Agile R&D funding? And the top hit is lack of available finance, time, and staff to plan or execute a proposal. And I can totally get that. We developed a survey before that we deployed with Leo staff, and that's absolutely one of the top hit. Paperwork overload is kind of the second most popular choice, and yeah, there definitely is a perception there that we'll drown you in paperwork, and I can tell you it's not true. It is a reasonably substantial undertaking, but at the same time, we might be giving you 150,000 euro, and you end up with the rights to everything at the end. So it's worth it, I certainly feel. And I also think that we can take multiple applications, and we like to see you putting in, doing R&D, come back to us 2 years later. So it might be a bit challenging the first time you do it, but it's going to be a lot easier the second, third, fourth time. And yeah, don't know if my product service idea is suitable for Agile. That's a very common refrain, certainly I've heard. And I would say reach out to us, fill out that OP, let's have a conversation, talk to your CEDO, talk to your DA. They'll be well placed to give you that feedback. So I think they're the three leading comments. Fiona, if you can put up the first one, or you could discuss them if you like, whatever. Okay, so question 1 was, what stage are you at with your innovation project? So half the respondents said they've discussed the idea with the team. That's fantastic. So I think next step is talk, if you're a client of Leo, Udros and Geltut or EI, talk to your representative within that agency. And even if not, or if you like, reach out to us and submit the outline proposal, and if you're a client of the agency, make sure to CC your rep on that as well, just so they're aware. They like to be made aware of it. And then the second most common option was a third of you are nowhere, you're just interested in learning more about R&D. That's great. I'm delighted to have you here today, and I hope I've demystified rather than remystified you in that time. Okay, those are the top 2. Fiona, I don't know, did you want to put up a third? Okay. So question 3, what would encourage you and or other Cyber Ireland members to apply for Agile R&D funding? So the most popular response was 44% of you said if you had more resources, time, staff, money, and that absolutely dovetails very well with the challenge you face earlier. Look, there's no doubt about it. It is a substantial undertaking. It does take effort, and it takes planning. You know, you'll have to keep the money coming in. You'll have to keep delivering on your extant contracts. You know, unless you're large enough to have a dedicated R&D team, this is something that'll have to be done alongside the day-to-day that is keeping you alive. And that's where the planning piece is really, really important. What I would say, though, is it's an investment in the future of your business. You know, it's that new product you've been dying to bring to life. It's that new service that you can see a need for in the market and is going to maybe open up a new export market for you, or, you know, secure, you know, 10 more contracts, or maybe 3 or 4x new revenue. It's that investment in the future. It is going to mean short-term pain, but the payoff is later. The next most popular comment was, if you knew your idea was a good fit for Agile R&D, that's great. Talk to us. We'll tell you exactly whether it's a good fit or not. And to be honest, the threshold is really quite low. You know, it's not like you're going to SFI. I was a research academic for 20 years, and you don't have to be developing anything, you know, groundbreaking. You know, we've had companies come in, they've had a particular type of sauce, and they want to develop a new range of sauces, or sauces that are, you know, last longer on the shelf. That kind of thing is perfect. You know, that's good enough. So if you've got some small new product service, that'll qualify. And there was 2 other competing ones for the third. If you thought the process paperwork was straightforward, I would say to you it's probably a lot less scary than you think. And then more case studies, presentations. We hear you on that, and we are developing case studies. You're going to hear an excellent one now from Trish from ThinScale, and we must, Debbie, I think we must put plans and effort into developing some kind of, you know, PDF versions of the case studies, so that the guys here can, you know, have something to read and share with the team members. Okay, I think that's probably enough for me on that. I might hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks for covering those, as I could not see them, so that was helpful. And a nice segue into the next part of the workshop. So Trish, I might invite you to come on there, and Fiona, if you could pin our 2 videos there so everybody can see it. So Trish, if you don't mind, maybe just starting off and giving us a bit of background about who ThinScale are, and maybe, you know, who are your client companies.
So ThinScale is an Irish company which was founded back in 2012 and started trade in 2013. So what we develop and sell is thin client software only solutions. Our main market sector would be BDOs and contact centers, but we've also sold into enterprise businesses. So effectively, the software locks down, excuse me, our corporate owned endpoints, and also bring your own device endpoints. Yeah. That's
great, perfect. And if you don't mind then just giving us a bit of an overview of your Agile Innovation project. How did you start the process of even investigating, you know, whether it was suitable or not, and developing that original idea? And where did you hear about the Agile Innovation Fund?
Okay, I suppose from my own perspective, just in previous roles that I've had, I've been, I suppose, heavily involved in the R&D grant application process with Enterprise Ireland. So, and Katrina Ward is RDA within Enterprise Ireland. So we had a conversation with her around, you know, supports in each of the areas in our business. But then in relation to the R&D side, we had, you know, we looked at obviously the, you know, the full R&D grant and the Agile, and then we looked at our product roadmap and kind of looked to see, was there any products or any kind of projects in there that were suitable. So we had one project which was redesigning our management console to make it cloud ready. So we spoke about the project with Katrina. She put us in touch with the technical advisor. We went through the project the CTO and myself sat down with him. We went through the project. He kind of verbally felt, look at this is right. And then we kind of cracked on then with the submission. I think at the time it didn't have because this was back 15 months ago, it didn't have that, you know, the outline wasn't a step in the process. So it was kind of back and forth on that. So I suppose for once we kind of seen that it was eligible, we then priced out the project from our own perspective. Obviously, some of the costs that we would have internally seen as being part of getting that product ready may not have been eligible from this grant's perspective, such as sales and marketing, which is, I suppose, understandable. But we priced out the product, and then we looked at whether it was going to be worth our while putting an application in or not, and we decided that it absolutely was. So we went back to Katrina, had a conversation with her, and then we started the process with the application. So I suppose from start to end internally, it was probably about a 6 week process between just getting the application written up, getting the project plan in place internally ourselves. I suppose the overall eligible spend on that project was about 292,000, and we were eligible for 45%, which was I think 131,000 in total. So I suppose from our perspective, it was definitely well worthwhile going through the process. And once we submitted it, then I think it took a couple of weeks to get the approval back. But obviously, we cracked on with the project immediately. And just as Porrick mentioned earlier, once we had submitted the application, any of the costs were eligible, assuming that we were going to get the go ahead from Enterprise Ireland, which we did.
Okay, so it was interesting the way that you were describing the process that you went through in identifying the project there, that first you had actually heard about the funding that was available,
yeah,
that you were able to go back and look at your product roadmap to find a suitable project to work on it, and split it out, you know, what were the suitable areas for funding that would be covered under the Agile Innovation Project funding. And then I suppose, Trish, where is the project now? So when did you start it, and has it been completed?
We started the project about 15 months ago, so it hasn't been completed. It's still ongoing. It's not too far off, though, I suppose, at this stage. So we haven't submitted, we haven't put an application in for the funding yet, because we're not quite at that stage. But it pretty much is on track with what our initial expectations were.
Okay, and has the Agile Innovation Fund, has it allowed you to, you know, take on that project or look at specific areas of it that you wouldn't have if the funding wasn't there?
To be honest, like, I think we would have went ahead with that project anyway. You know, I think it wasn't, because for us it was crucial that we needed that for our product roadmap, but just it helped the funding of the business and the project, the fact that we got 45% funding on the eligible aspects of it. So I would certainly think especially from a finance person's perspective, you know, the application process, you know, from a company perspective, was the effort that went into it. And a lot of which is around that kind of project planning and the costing should happen anyway. And unfortunately, in a lot of business, it doesn't. And I think that was one of the big benefits of, you know, it is a big benefit of putting in grant applications, because you have to sit and think that out and go through it. And then you have, I suppose, you have got the planner, the original budget that you set out, that you kind of compare your track to, I suppose. So yeah, I think it would have happened anyway, but it definitely helped us fund it, and which meant it freed up resources and funding within the company to do other things.
Okay, and just from the results coming back from the poll there around what are the challenges for companies around engaging with this type of funding or an R&D, was the lack of available finance or staff or resources.
Yeah.
How did you address that?
I suppose really the main person that worked on the application was myself, and I worked alongside the CTO, and I suppose I've 20 years experience in finance, so and I've done lots of these grant applications. So I suppose we're fortunate that, you know, that it had a resource to be able to work on that internally, or, you know, ourselves. But I can understand that being an issue, you know, particularly if there isn't somebody, I suppose, you know, within the business, and they may not necessarily need to be an account, you know, to be a finance background person, but somebody that has written applications and then can, you know, that can liaise with the technical people and bring the balance to those applications. But in general, the application is straightforward enough. The full application, like there's nothing complicated in terms of, I think the you know, the costings that's needed for the project and whatnot. So yeah, so I don't, you know, in general, as I said, from our perspective, we were okay on that front.
Okay, and that was one of the second challenge that was coming back from companies was, you know, the fear of the overburdensome around paperwork, but that didn't seem to be the case for yourselves. No,
not because we, you know, it is that initial, the initial application is the big piece. Like when it comes to the submission, just as I think yourself or Port mentioned earlier on, the timesheet tracking is, you know, and we made sure from kind of early doors that we had that in place, because I would have been quite aware of that from you know, previous submissions I would have done with other companies, and indeed through thin scale for other grant funding in area, you know, in other areas of the business. So once we've that in, I know when it comes to the resubmission, it probably will be a day's work, maybe 10 hours work to pull everything that's together to put that resubmission in from my perspective. And I certainly don't think that's too much of an ask given the value of the funding that we're actually getting and the benefit it's bringing to the company. Okay, so look, there's a clear payback if you're talking about 1 day's work or potentially 45% of a 300k project. Yes, is a good incentive there for companies. And I suppose, Patricia, maybe just one final question from myself before we open it up to any other companies that are here. Do you have any advice for companies that are looking at, you know, developing a project for the Agile Innovation Fund, or just starting on their innovation journey? I actually do, because one of the things, and I know it's, and I'm not sure whether this has actually changed, but when we looked at it, and just from I know my previous experience, you tend to be allowed to have just one Agile grant in at any one time. I don't know, Pork, whether that's actually still the case. So that one has to be fully finished before other one starts. And I know you can have multi-projects within a grant application. So I think you just really need to sit back and kind of think, well, what else could you potentially be missing out on, and just to make sure that they're within that application. On
that, Trish, yeah, that definitely used to be the case, but now recently we've gotten ones in, multiple ones from the same company, same time, and they're fine. So
you let them overlap now. Yeah,
they are overlapping now. We're just starting to see that happen. So I must look for that minute just to see where that was clarified. But yeah, it seems to be the case that you can just submit now. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant. That's actually good to know. And I as I mentioned before, I suppose in relation to the innovation journey from our perspective, I suppose I think what the good thing is about going through the Agile process, or any process and that planning, is that you're kind of planning out what the cost is. And also, like, I don't think there's any company that would put in for a grant for work they weren't planning on doing anyway, because if they do, they're making the wrong decision. You know, it should be a project that you're planning on doing and you want to do anyway. And also, it forces you, I think, as a business to really look at it, and kind of you're looking at the cost and you're going, what payback are we going to get for this? What's the market opportunity? What's the payback within that market opportunity? So I think, you know, it allows, the actual process itself allows you to kind of reevaluate it, as in, does it make business sense to develop it or not? That's fantastic, Trish. Thanks very much for sharing, I suppose, your experience with the companies here. Andrew, I might just ask you as well while we have you here. So Andrew Tobin is CEO of Strive Secure, which provides secure private cloud solutions to companies both in Ireland and internationally. And Andrew, I know you've availed of this program as well. So is there anything maybe you'd like to share from your experience, or what the project was?
Sure, Owen. Good afternoon, everyone. We did a smaller agile innovation probably about 2 years ago now. We have a kind of a very strong technical team that are full of good ideas, and trying to rein them in is nearly more of a challenge than because if we ran with every idea, we'd just be complete disarray, you know. But I suppose our challenge was we found the process of applying, and that's straightforward enough. And even drawing down and whatever, maybe a little bit onerous in terms of timesheets and that kind of thing, you know what I mean? But look, outside of that, it's fine. It was just paperwork. It was straightforward, and Enterprise Ireland are very helpful in terms of that process. I guess a kind of a learning for us was that, you know, like Strive, things are going well. We're growing at about 150% per annum at the moment, doing well in some European countries. And I guess we invested in a kind of a project that was probably slightly misaligned with our overall company goal of becoming Europe's largest private cloud provider. It was a little bit left field of that. It was around specialism and backups around Microsoft 365 kind of suite. So it was an 80K grant. I think we got about 37 back. We developed it to a fairly advanced prototype, and in truth, we had to park it then, because what was happening is we had developers working on it. We had project managers. We were using up a lot of internal resources. We just felt, you know what, the company's on such a kind of a fast track progression anyway. It was just tying up resources when we should have been making hay today, as opposed to almost worrying about making hay tomorrow, because sometimes you can be chasing too many things, you know. But we did learn a huge amount from it, that, you know what, if we're going to invest in innovation in the short term, it's going to be incremental innovation. So I really like what you're saying now, Padraig, around the fact that you have that process improvement, kind of, you're allowing for that. And I think that's key for companies like us that are scaling rapidly, that, you know, we're obviously in a hot space. We have something unique. We don't want that diluted too much. So let's do small incremental stuff that's going to improve margins, improve sales, improve productivity, that type of thing. And we've kind of set it as an internal benchmark until we're kind of turning over 5 or 6 million per month type of scenario, where we can almost allocate 5-10% of that for proper R&D, where then we can look at breakthrough innovations or maybe more radical type of innovations. You know, it's, you know, that kind of makes sense. So that's kind of the journey we're on at the moment. In saying that, one of our team has what we think is a very solid idea around blockchain for data centers. But I see Pat O'Grady, our DA, is on the line as well. And, you know, we spoke yesterday, and what we're actually going to do in this instance is we're going to bounce the idea off some funds at early stage before we actually get into the, you know, some sort of prototyping and potential investment, even from, or consideration for investment from Enterprise Ireland. So we're going to bounce off some VCs and different types of funds to say, look, what, you know, because they're the guys that are seeing lots of these hot ideas, these kind of unicorny type of things. So let's get some feedback from them first before we go into, you know, into investing €500,000 or €1 million in the first round of prototyping. That's kind of my tuppence worth on its own.
Yeah, that I think that's really useful. You know, it doesn't matter how good the you know, the process is and the funding is from Enterprise Ireland, but if your project doesn't align with your overall company goals and it becomes a distraction, well, that's kind of a key piece of feedback, I think, as well.